Julian and Kevin.
No, this is my new one. So how did you, your
Kurt.
Aaron.
1 minute.
Good morning.
Good morning, Erin. We have
No quorum yet?
not quite yet.
Okay, we have time. We have time. Okay.
Okay. Two more people. Gosh. Who was the other one?
Hey, Rhonda, this is Mitesh. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. And with Heather.
Sean.
Sean.
Shane.
Shane. I got Shane. Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Okay, Erin, we do have a quorum.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody to the February 4th TAC meeting. We'll go ahead and kick off and do call to order and roll call. Rhonda.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the TAC. Coconino County, Lucinda Andriani is excused. Christopher Tressler is also excused. Coconino County Citizen Representative Jillian Thomas.
Present.
Thank you. City of Flagstaff, Shane Dilley.
Here and accounted for.
Thank you. City of Flagstaff Citizen Representative.
Present.
Kevin
Good morning.
Parks. Good morning. Thank you. Metro Plan Dave Wessel. I don't believe he's on yet. He is expected. I'll come back. NAU Aaron
Here.
Stom. Our NAU student Clarice Green.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. CCC Kurt Stull.
Good morning. Present.
And we have Gail Jackson being admitted. Gail, are you with us? Gail Jackson with Econa, our Economic Development Representative.
Here.
Thank you, Gail. And Metro Plan Dave Wessel. Don't believe he's here yet, but he is expected. We also have our attorney, Mitesh Patel, on the line. And
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And Rick Tatter has joined us from the city of Flagstaff. Rick, are you there?
Good morning. Yes, I'm here.
Good morning.
Yeah.
And we have staff members in the training room and on Zoom. And it looks like Dave is joining us right now. Erin, so back to you.
Okay, thanks, Rhonda. And before we move on to the safety minute, just a slight update to our process today and future meetings. We're going to ask everybody if you're willing to share your video when you're speaking so that we can see your smiling faces. It's been too long since we've been together. So it would just be, it kind of increases our level of engagement if we can see the speaker. So if you have a comment or a question during any of the presentations today, we would ask that if possible that you turn on your camera. With that, we're going to go into our safety minute with Sam Short.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Mountain Line Transit Advisory Committee. There are many different hazards on the job that pose danger to life and health. Are you aware that sitting for long periods of the day is one of them? According to many research studies, extended sitting can be a factor in different health problems. Some issues that can be attributed to excessive sitting are mental health issues, a higher risk of death from heart disease and other causes, a higher risk of being disabled, and obesity. A study published in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine found that older men and women who sat for longer periods of time were more likely to die during the 12-year follow-up, and also found that those people who sat for more than 11 hours a day were more at risk. So who sits 11 hours a day? Do you sit for very long while commuting to work? Do you sit all day at work and then go home and sit in front of the television or computer? It might be you. To put into perspective how much an office worker or bus driver may sit in a career, we will do the math for a normal work week. Commuting to and from work, approximately 1 hour. Sitting at a desk or driving a bus, 8 hours. At home in front of the television or computer, 2 hours. This equates to approximately 86,000 hours of sitting during one person's work career. When working at a job where you need to sit excessively, here are some things you can do to be more active. Get up and exercise, stretch, or just move around during your breaks and lunches. Invest in a desk that allows you to stand up while working. Exercise before and or after work for at least 1 hour. Our bodies are designed to move and be active. Take care of your body and make it a point to avoid sitting for longer periods of time. Thank you and welcome to the February TAC meeting.
Thank you, Sam. Now I feel like we should all stand up for this meeting. I'm very impressed when I have colleagues that are on Zoom meetings and they're on one of those balance boards and they're going back and forth. All right, moving on. Approval of the TAC minutes from January 7th. Are there any comments or questions on the minutes before we get a motion to approve? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the January 7th minutes?
Madam Chair, this is Shane. I move to approve the minutes, and Sam, thank you for the report. I'm actually standing right now. Gave me a
Show off.
conscience.
That's great, Shane. Thank you. Can I get a second for approval of the minutes?
I'll second.
Who is that? Kurt. Thank you, Kurt. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The minutes are so approved. Thanks, everybody. As we are moving into our business agenda, there is one change to our discussion action items. We will be pulling up the Route 8 extension, which is currently listed as progress reports. That will actually be a presentation and discussion item. We will have that be item number 5 after the service requirements. So moving into our first item, it's consider and approve the second FY21 budget revision. Heather.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Transit Advisory Committee. So the item today is a follow-up to the fiscal year 2021 budget adoption as conducted in June. During that adoption, the board did determine that the wage increases identified during the 2020 compensation study would be delayed for exempt staff members, and that those wage increases would be considered as we moved through the fiscal year if revenue projections changed. And so you all may recall that we were projecting a recession as a result of COVID, and that was one of the concerns. So the action we're seeking today is approval for our second amendment to our second revision to our budget, and that would move 50% or a total not to exceed $40,438.88 from contingency to wages so that we can give exempt staff the 50% of the compensation study adjustment that was identified that has been delayed. Rhonda, next slide. So this is just a reminder what was in that original budget recommendation, which really is the same thing that I just said. Next slide. Again, just laying out the 3 steps that the board authorized during the budget adoption. Action 1 was actually approved in November and allowed us to implement 50% of the pay adjustment for those exempt staff effective October 1. We're now at Action 2, which is based on the second quarter revenue projections, allowing us to give the other 50% effective January 1. And if, in fact, those projections stay where they're at the end of the third quarter, probably in April, we will be seeking a third amendment that would allow us to retroactively implement those pay changes. So each pay change was made with the beginning of the quarter and has not been active all the way back to the beginning of the fiscal year. And I'll just remind non-exempt staff, our hourly staff members, they received 100% of the pay adjustment that was identified in that compensation study effective July 1. Exempt staff did receive a 1% COLA, and so any adjustments offered throughout the year are adjusted for that 1% COLA that was granted. Next slide. These are the transit revenue projections received from the city of Flagstaff late in January. And you can see that on this estimate, fiscal year 2020 actually ended 10% above the COVID recession projection that we used during the budget adoption. Fiscal year 2021 is estimated to be 6% above that. And then in the future years, you can see an average of 8.2% over that 4-year period. So based on these projections, it is our recommendation, next slide, to go ahead with that pay adjustment. And so just to again reiterate, the recommendation is to move expenses that are budgeted in contingency to the wage and benefit line items for exempt staff, authorizing a 50% adjustment less the COLA that was given on July 1, and that change would be effective January 1st. We will give retroactive pay to January 1st, but not all the way back to July 1. And with that, I think that's my recommendation. Next slide. And I don't have any other information to present, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Heather. And as a reminder to folks, if you can use the raise hand functionality, if you have a question or a comment for Heather, and I will call on you. And then if you can turn on your camera. I have another. And as well, for those that might be newer to the meetings, the TAC does not approve anything. These are for the board to approve, but we help to review the information, ask questions. It often can help Mountain Line ensure that the presentation before it goes to board is complete. Are there any comments or questions for Heather? Other than this is great news. It's really, it's been a real hard year for folks. So it's nice when things like this can happen. Heather, I'm not seeing any comments or questions. So thank you very much.
I actually had my hand raised.
Oh, I'm so
Madam Chair.
sorry, Shane.
I was trying to follow your direction.
Sorry, I missed it. Thank you. Go ahead.
No, just real quick, and I'm still standing, Sam. Heather, I understand that during the COVID, there were some concessions made on the fees that were charged, right, for your transit users.
Correct.
Is that
Yes.
correct?
Correct.
The numbers that this is being based off of are the numbers that you're getting from the city. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So from an aggregate perspective on all of your revenues, where does Mountain Line sit? It doesn't appear like the decision is being made off of the aggregate, but off of what you're getting from the city. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that. I will consider putting that in our staff report too, because I'm sure that's a question will come up from our new board members. We lost roughly around $500,000 in fares due to fare-free operation over that period. We continue to see a decline in fare revenue because we have reduced ridership. We're at about 50% on all routes except Route 10. Route 10 is actually performing much less than that. But we did receive the one-time funding through the CARES Act of $7.2 million, and we're using that $7.2 million to cover our fare loss as well as the increased expenses that we're experiencing. And so if we had the slide that showed the total financial plan, the financial plan is actually up, say 5 years from now, by about $5 million. So if we take.
So Heather, I think that it would really bolster and strengthen the overall discussion and help the ultimate decision if you were to provide the full picture, understanding that there are concessions that have been made operationally, and that even though those concessions have been made and you're still kind of tracking unfavorably, there are other things that are bolstering the financial picture for Mountain Line, and I think that all goes to support the recommended action. I just think that the color and the picture is important. Thanks.
Thank you, Shane. Any other? Now I'm going to watch really closely for hands. Any other comments or questions for Heather? Now I see none. So we can move on to the next item. Thank you, Heather. Arizona Public Service APS rate structure and electric buses. Busy.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Transit Advisory Committee. Busy Collins, Transit Planner for Mountain Line. And I will be presenting on the Arizona Public Service rate structure in relation to electric buses. Next slide, please, Rhonda. So as part of the Zero Emissions Bus Transition Plan, I'm going to present two short findings that really lead us to this discussion today. And both of them have to do with increased costs associated with electric buses, which we knew when we adopted the policy directive looking at battery electric buses moving forward. And this first slide shows the cost for charging our buses, so the electric costs, and only the green portion, so 18% of our costs are the actual energy going to the buses to charge those batteries. And the remaining, the purple, orange, and the blue, are all peak demand charges. So 81% of the cost that we anticipate to incur will be peak demand charges. And the ZEB plan did identify that if we were to reduce peak demand charges by 30%, then the fuel costs will be equal to current hybrid electric costs, which is great. So that's kind of a goal there on the electric side. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And the other additional cost comes with capital. So there's both the charging infrastructure, which has a host of items pictured here, and then there's also the incremental costs for electric bus, which is about $200,000 more than our current hybrid buses. And so the ZEB plan really looked at ways that we can bring those costs down. There were a bunch of examples on partnerships for capital, a bunch of examples on utility rate structures that could be supportive for transit fleet. And then one more item, next slide, please, Rhonda, that dovetails into this conversation is an effort that's being led by the 3 utility providers in the state, the Arizona Statewide Transportation Electrification Effort, so AZTE. And we do anticipate seeing the recommendations from that plan next week on February 10th, and hoping that the recommendations are aligned with what we found in the ZEB plan for, rate structures that could be supportive of electric bus transit specifically, even though this plan looked at the full spectrum of transportation electrification. We do anticipate recommendations specific to transit. We were a stakeholder group. But ultimately, the ACC will decide what to do with this AZTE recommendations and plan. And so next slide, please, Rhonda. So these, between the ZEB plan that Mountain Line conducted and the AZTE effort that's being done across the state, Mountain Line has initiated some discussions with transit agencies who either have electric vehicles, which is currently only Tucson, or agencies that are thinking about electrifying their fleet vehicles. And we're just starting with, public transit agencies right now. And so Aaron, we'll be looking, to include you in these conversations as we go forward. But we also included our statewide transit advocacy group, ASTA. And so we've kind of just started having discussions, really understanding how we can achieve the two goals listed here. So reducing that peak demand cost to make the charging costs equal with diesel costs that we're seeing right now, and then offsetting those capital costs between buses and the charging infrastructure to support those electric buses. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And so we've had 2 meetings so far. We have one more meeting after the AZTE outcomes. So next week we'll meet with this electric bus group and ASTA's legislative liaisons to identify a path forward to meet goals. And it's been a learning experience, I think, for all of us. Even the legislative liaisons, they've had experience with both the Arizona Corporation Commission, ACC, and the various utility providers in our state, and understanding where is the most effective path for us to communicate and start requesting these changes. And what does that look like? So I do anticipate having more information for the board meeting on the 17th, and we'll be bringing back, what does that path forward mean for Mountain Line to the TAC in the future as well. So I'd love to answer any questions that you might have on this topic.
Thank you, Busy. Questions for Busy?
I have one question, Madam Chair. Thank you, Busy. Appreciate it. Just generally speaking, I mean, we have some electrified buses in our system, correct?
We have an all hybrid electric fleet. So all 29 of our buses are hybrid. So it's a regenerative battery, kind of like a Prius, but it also runs on diesel. Yeah. So
what are your thoughts right now about going all electric? I mean, is that practical given our topography and our area? At this point, I mean, has technology advanced to the point where it's actually efficient to run that way, and it doesn't compromise operations? What are your just high level general thoughts on that? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So the ZEB plan did identify that battery electric buses can work within our topography, with our climate. Part of the reason, so kind of battery electric buses can either be charged en route, so throughout the day, or depot only. So you're plugging them in at night and they are charging slowly, usually during that off-peak demand period. And the difference between that on-route and off-route charging is the range that they're able to do. And then, so when we really chose the on-route charging because it gives us that operational flexibility. We're not limited to only running a bus about 8 to 10 hours a day. We're not really concerned when we have to run the heater, which we are looking at with our battery electric buses. We will not need a diesel powered heater unit, which is a concern because then you're kind of eliminating the emission savings from having battery electric buses. So we definitely looked at all of the items, Shane, that you brought up, and do think that the battery electric buses that we chose is the best path forward for operations, our topography, our climate, et cetera. And then the other component that you asked is this feasible for Mountain Line? And when we presented to the board in June and really asked for a direction, do we want to pursue greener technologies? Do we want to stay with our hybrid electric buses, which work really great for us? The board definitely said that, the climate action goals of the community are very important, of Mountain Line are very important, and that there's costs associated with transitioning to battery electric buses that is currently not covered in the financial plan, is not covered by the current transit tax revenue. And so really looking as a policy adoption. And so really looking at bus by bus, project by project, as funding and interest allows, incorporating those electric elements to support buses. And we do have currently 2 battery electric buses that are funded. We are looking at procuring those within this year, but that is all that is currently funded. We will be bringing to the TAC board next month a grant application to support for the charging infrastructure to support those first 2 buses. So really looking at like minimal amount of investment. We have these 2 electric buses, a minimal amount of charging infrastructure to support those, and then using that as a pilot to test battery electric buses on our system in real time and reevaluate at that point when we have the experience to really see, is this, on paper it's feasible, is it feasible on the ground? So I hope that answers your question.
More than I ever had hoped. I really appreciate that, Busy, and sorry to take us down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, Madam Chair, but it was great information. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, Shane, it's the same questions. And so Busy and I have already been working on, we've got a number of projects going on looking at electrification of buses, and it's the same questions we're asking. So you are absolutely appropriate to ask that. So folks, we're all learning this as we go. Busy is far ahead of me, but I'm working to catch up. And, I really do hope for Flagstaff and for NAU that we can significantly contribute to the climate plan. So any other comments or questions for Busy? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Busy. Yes. Oh, you're not going anywhere. Sorry, you stay right there. Okay, next on the agenda is the update on the BRT, the Bus Rapid Transit, in relationship to the Milton Corridor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so next item, I'm happy to talk with you about, give you an update, because we have been in this process for many years. We kicked off the BRT project. Next slide, please, Rhonda. Mountain Line kicked off the BRT project in 2018. And just as a brief reminder, BRT is really a toolbox to help buses be more competitive with cars. And BRT projects are eligible for a unique funding source, which is why Mountain Line's definitely pursued this once in the past with the Route 10 link, and now pursuing it again for this BRT project. But it's eligible for funding under the Federal Transit Administration Capital Investment Grant Program, CIG. And the CIG program funds 80%, up to 80% share of capital costs. So that's for transit improvements, that's bicycle improvements, and that's pedestrian improvements. So it can have a really dramatic impact in a corridor where a BRT might operate. Next slide, please. And while the BRT has been going since 2018, we have been working within the framework and coordinating with the ADOT Milton Road Corridor Master Plan. So I'll refer to that as the Milton CMP. And the Milton CMP kicked off in 2017, and it has yet to be finalized. We are anticipating that this year. So many years in this process, many, overlapping coordination between the 2 projects, but they are very unique projects. This map shows the BRT route in blue and the CMP, Milton CMP in red, and they also conducted a Highway 180 CMP, so that's on the northern portion in red. But the overlapping portion between the BRT and the Milton CMP is the purple line. And that's definitely caused some delay to Mountain Lions BRT project. And we are, really working with stakeholders on all sides, since the stakeholders for the BRT project are the same for the Milton CMP project. So really just trying to coordinate and be in lockstep with each other, because the recommended alternative for the purple portion will be what the BRT takes and moves forward with in our project. So there's a little background between how these projects overlap. Next slide, please, Rhonda. And so just recently, there was, late last year, there was public outreach for the Milton CMP. And this was the last component to rank all of the alternatives that were being examined by the Milton CMP. And the outcome of public outreach and feedback and project partner feedback and criteria scoring, et cetera, was that alternative 5 came out as number 1. And you can see here that it adds a general traffic lane, it adds a bike lane, it adds parkway, it widens the sidewalk. It's really, it's an exciting improvement potentially for multimodal transportation. Please also note that in those outside lanes, the bus would be running in general traffic, which is possible. That's what we're doing today. And do also note that the right-of-way proposed on this cross-section is 125 feet, where currently the bottom picture of no-build hybrid shows, I think it's 80 feet. And so, somewhere between 80 feet and 100 feet is what we have currently for right-of-way on Milton Road. And so number 1 was alternative 5. Number 2 was a no-build hybrid. And basically what you see there is the general layout that we could expect, but there would be spot improvements captured into that hybrid term. And next slide, please, Rhonda. And within this hybrid, so I apologize. Actually, so between so alternative 5 was number 1, hybrid was number 2. ADOT really said that based on the negative travel time impacts, so there actually was no benefit, and actually it was detrimental to cars' travel time on that section of Milton. With alternative 5, so we can add another lane of traffic in each direction for cars to run on, but it does not save time. There's really no time savings with any of the alternatives we found through this Milton CMP process, and that is ADOT's top priority is, improve traffic operations on Milton corridor. And since there was negative travel time impacts, it was not recommended. And the second component of why the alternative 5 top ranking alternative was not recommended was based on one of the questions from the public survey asking, would you, general public, be supportive of number of buildings being impacted on this roadway? And had, 5 different choices. And so from that one question, ADOT did determine that there was strong public opposition to right-of-way impacts. And recall that, we're looking at least of 25 feet wider, if not more, in various areas of the Milton corridor to add those bicycle and pedestrian improvements, and also that the general traffic lane in each direction. And so based on those 2 items, ADOT recommended the second top ranking alternative, the no-build hybrid. And here's a brief description of the no-build hybrid, that it has the spot improvements, the no-build spot aspects. It does not add additional lanes on Milton Road. So again, there's that cross-section shown at the bottom. We're still looking at 2 lanes in each direction, buses running in general traffic. Item C, that there would be a balance of traffic operations with multimodal improvements. And so various multimodal improvements that would impact traffic operations would be like pedestrian crossings, improving those pedestrian crossings, having transit signal priority, which is a BRT tool, having that added to some of the signalized intersections, allowing, giving buses priority to move through, which might impact, it's yet to be determined, might impact general traffic. So really ADOT's looking at what is that appropriate balance between, the multimodal improvements and traffic operations. And then item D, avoiding or minimizing impacts to property. So they're not interested in having a cross section, having multimodal improvements that would impact property, which makes sense. And definitely in the BRT project, we did find that there would be many opportunities to kind of shift, the roadway and maybe adjust the width of sidewalks, et cetera. There's a lot of flexibility in actually applying those multimodal improvements to reduce impact to buildings. So very long explanation, I apologize. But this is how the meeting in January ended, with project partners supporting the no-build hybrid as the recommended alternative. And next slide, please, Rhonda. The next steps are pictured here, and this is ADOT's timeline. And this is the ideal timeline. Definitely having a lot of the project partners with conflicting goals makes it challenging to arrive on consensus and really make decisions to move this process forward. And so we are anticipating in February to identify which spot improvements, which are the multimodal improvements, are on the table. What is allowed by ADOT that doesn't impact traffic operations too much. However, too much is not defined. It's definitely a moving target for the project partners to understand what possibilities are out there. And so that will be decided in late February, hopefully. And then looking at March to review model scenario results. I do personally think that it'll be very challenging to have decisions made on spot improvements without actually understanding what all of those impacts are. So I actually don't really think that we can have a robust decision on spot improvements until basically April, ideally, based on the schedule. And so hopefully in April at that time, we can have clarity on what it means for the BRT project. Next slide, please, Rhonda. So some of the items that Mountain Line's looking for clarity on is what BRT tools can be included. Transit signal priority is a minimum eligibility component for the FTA CIG grant. If we can't get that, it really hamstrings the project tremendously. So again, is TSP allowed with the traffic impacts to operations? Unclear at this point. Also, when the CMP is adopted, so say transit signal priority is adopted in the CMP and we're moving through the next process, there's still the ADOT North Central traffic impacts analysis, TIA process, that kind of supersedes any other plans. And there's some conversation there of how, would the CMP, Milton CMP carry that weight? Could it actually influence the TIA process to ensure that BRT tools are included? Again, unclear. We're working through some of these questions with our partners. And then the other component is Mountain Line very much supports bicycle and pedestrian improvements. We want to see wide sidewalks. We want to see bike lanes. We want to see that parkway to give a buffer for people walking on the sidewalk. Those are great benefits to the corridor and will definitely benefit transit users trying to access bus stops. However, if say BRT tools are not accepted, but bike and pedestrian infrastructure is, at that point, there's little financial value to Mountain Line for a BRT project. It's a bike and ped project, which is a huge improvement for our community in that area. So, at that point, Mountain Line's up to requesting from our partners that the 20% local match, should we continue with the BRT project, that the local match be covered by our project partners on bike and ped infrastructure, because it's basically a bike and ped project. So I guess to summarize and to conclude, there's a couple main points listed here that Mountain Line's seeking clarity on, and we do anticipate getting those questions answered by April. And at that time, we will be coming back to the TAC board for a decision on, go, no go for the BRT project. Does it make sense? Do we have the BRT tools to support our application, to support the financial value that we hope a BRT project could bring? And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Busy. Questions or comments for Busy? Not seeing any. Thanks, Busy.
Thank you.
Next item, review Mount. Oh,
I'm sorry. I was looking for the raised hand thing and I couldn't find it. This is
okay.
Dave
And then I
Welker.
also see Jillian's got her hand. So let's do, is that Dave talking? Yeah. Hi, Dave, then
Yes,
Jillian. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just Busy, I think, captured it very well for the implications for the BRT project. And I just wanted to add a couple things. From a longer term implementation perspective, the city is looking at zoning standards along Milton that would maybe increase setbacks. And so through redevelopment, it would accommodate and require wider sidewalks and landscaping. And then through the deeper setbacks would accommodate future turn lanes. So that's, even though the cross section looks fairly stark with just the 6-foot sidewalks back of curb, longer term, we could see redevelopment deliver some beautification. Unfortunately, that doesn't work very well for a BRT grant, which would come in all at once. And ADOT was fairly adamant that they wouldn't support a large grant that would come in and do wholesale right-of-way takes. I think the other thing, we've heard about the active transportation master plan. There's some alternates within the corridor that can be explored to better improve bicycle mobility, primarily as we saw in that cross section. There are no bicycle lanes on Milton in the no-build hybrid. You could narrow up lanes, narrow up the median, and fit a 3-foot shoulder in on each side, or 3.5-foot shoulder, plus the gutter pan, which would make it functional but not particularly comfortable. So there's still a lot of, I think, discussions to be had outside of this. There did seem to be some flexibility. There is a list of spot improvements, but there was at least some open-mindedness to maybe consider those and expand on those. I think one of the questions that's remaining is the ability to accommodate bus stops, for instance, and right-of-way for bus stops. And I think there's some open-mindedness to that. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Jillian.
I think Dave has answered most of my question, which was how, if the pedestrian and bike committees of the city are involved as partners in this program. And I think Dave's answered my questions that despite what ADOT says, we can look forward to better pedestrian and bike paths along Milton.
Yes, and I will just add that Martin Ince of the city, he oversees the pedestrian and bicycle advisory committees. He's been intimately involved, and I understand providing updates on the project to them. I'm not aware of any ADOT presentations seeking feedback specifically from the PAC in the back, but the BRT is definitely presented to both of them, got incredible feedback that we did share with ADOT. Yes, thank you for that question.
Any other questions for Busy? Seeing none, thank you, Busy. Next item is review Mountain Line service requirements and funding structure. Heather.
Good morning again. So the next staff report is actually related to a series of staff reports that will be presented to the board over the next 3 months. Rhonda, if you could go to the next slide. The effort is really about board education. Oops, we have that one twice. One more. We have 3 new board members on our board of directors, 2 for the city of Flagstaff and 1 for Coconino County. And staff really felt it was probably a good idea to review some key information about Mountain Line, who we are and what we do, to help our board members know what we're seeking from them and how they can engage to set policies, et cetera, for Mountain Line. So this is the first in that series of presentations. I can go quickly, stop whenever there are questions, but I think most of the TAC will be familiar with this information, but I didn't want to just skip it. It's always good to go through it in case I'm missing something that someone feels is of value for our board. So the next slide, the first item we're going to look at is service requirements and financial, I'm getting my notes open on the other screen, and financial structure information. So Mountain Line service requirements, want to make sure everyone is aware that paratransit is actually a required part of our services. It is origin to destination, which means we provide more than curb to curb. We actually will help people from the doorway of a business to the vehicle, or from the vehicle to the doorway of their home. That does require them to apply for that additional assistance. Generally, paratransit is required curb to curb. The FTA has come out with guidance asking us to do more than that when it's necessary to assist our clients. And then we are, that service is required within 3/4 miles of the fixed route. So it is as the crow flies, not as the bus drives. So we could actually end up going 2.5 miles to get to someone's home from a bus route, but as a crow flies, it's 3/4 mile from that route. So those are the requirements for where we go and how we do that. It is required that paratransit service operate the same hours that the bus is available. So if our bus schedule is 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., paratransit needs to mirror those hours of service. And the fare cannot be more than twice what is charged on the bus. And the last one is that we must allow and provide the ability to make reservations up to the day before the ride is requested. My purse. Sorry, I was interrupted in my home, obviously. The reason we feel like it's important to talk a little bit about this is because paratransit is quite expensive. Next slide, Rhonda. So as you can see on this slide, paratransit cost per trip and cost per hour have changed dramatically or drastically over the last 5 years. And if I actually went back to several 10, 15 years ago, you would even see the number is very far from that. Over the last 5 years, so from 2016 to 2020, our cost per trip increased by 20%, and you can see our cost per hour is almost doubled. Next slide. Because we know it's an expensive service, we are always looking for ways to make the service more efficient or to provide the same level of service with less expensive opportunities. So we introduced the taxi program. This is where we provide our paratransit customers a travel card, a preloaded Visa MasterCard that they can then use for taxis and other shared ride services. So I keep saying taxi, but I want to be clear, they can use Lyft, they can use Uber. That's one of the reasons we went to the card, was to ensure that they had those ride service options available to them. The taxi service obviously is much cheaper. You can see it's $15 and $16 per trip. Unfortunately, as the federal regulations are written, we can't require people to use the taxi. We have to provide the van and shared ride service. That we continue to encourage people to use the taxi because it is less expensive. And I will tell you what we're witnessing is that people are supplementing their trips with taxi, not necessarily making replacements. That's historically been true. In the last 9 months, while we are dealing with COVID, we're actually starting to see a replacement. So people are choosing those taxi trips over the shared rides. So our demand for the paratransit is a lot less. Our demand for the taxi is a lot up. And we're able to actually do more trips in the taxi than we are in the van. So we consider that to be good. Our biggest concern is making sure that if people do need this very individualized service, it is still available to them. So clients are eligible for paratransit, and this is in the staff report, based on their ability to board and navigate and disembark the bus service, sorry. So it could be that they can't walk to the bus, and so curb cuts become a problem there, or lack of sidewalks also become a problem there. If somebody could get to that, could cover the distance between their home and the bus stop, if they don't have a sidewalk to do it or they don't have a curb cut to do it, then that makes that trip eligible for paratransit instead of fixed route. There's other concerns we go through in that way, but the application process the client goes through for paratransit is really designed to determine, can they board, navigate, and disembark that vehicle based on their abilities. We will never be able to 100% remove paratransit service. Again, it's a required service under the Federal Transit Administration rules. It's tied to the 5307 money that we receive, that we use for capital and operating, but we will continue to look for other things that we can do to make that program more efficient. Kate and her team right now are looking at same day or on-demand service, microtransit, sorry. And the hope is that we can interline these two services, making them both very cost effective using existing resources versus adding another resource or service to our another demand to our cost and infrastructure. So with that, I'll pause. If we go to the next slide, I think that's everything that I had. And I'll pause to be sure if there's any questions before we kind of switch gears over to the financial funding structure and financial management.
Thanks, Heather. Any questions or comments for Heather on paratransit? Nope, go ahead, Heather.
All right, next slide. So the next series of slides is about our financial management practices and funding structure. So as indicated in the staff report, we internally manage all of our financial functions at Mountain Line. We do have a contractor that provides payroll services, and we use an independent auditor to come in and do our annual audit services. But overall, we have staff that handle that. So the management service director, previously administrative director, oversees our financial management policies and is supported by 3 team members to really conduct all of that work, from paying the bills to conducting our procurements. We do have several bank accounts spread out over several banks, and that does include a purchase card program. So we have, as I described, the taxi program, but we also have an employee procurement card program that allows our employees to make purchases using those cards instead of invoices and AP. Treasury services are provided by Coconino County Treasurer. That is in the master IGA and our service agreement. So they make all of the investment decisions on our behalf, and we really have the benefit of our small portion of the pooled money that they have receiving the benefit of those programs when they invest them, and then we receive a portion of interest earned. We do have the annual financial audit, which includes our single entity audit, which is related to our grant funding, the annual budget process, and then we do twice annual financial reviews with the board of directors. So that was just meant to give you kind of a picture of how we manage our financial functions. Next slide. We are funded through several sources. I will tell you, NEPTA earns no money on their own outside of the fares that we collect on the vehicles and the interest on funds on deposit. So the transit taxes, for example, are all managed by the City of Flagstaff. So the City of Flagstaff is probably our major funding source outside of the federal revenues. And the process for those funds is that they really deposit 1/4 of the annual operating on hand with us, because again, they collect the transit tax, they manage that transit tax, and they really pay to us what we need on each fiscal year. The funds on deposit give us cash flow, which is really important. We get all of our federal money on reimbursement basis. So we need cash flow to make sure we can just do the day-to-day expenses. After that 1/4 deposit is made annually, then we receive quarterly operating that is the full annual budget. Again, it's the City of Flagstaff's budget, not our full budget. So they pay us 1/4 of what their annual budget is. We do reimburse monthly for our capital and one-time expenditures. And then we meet with city staff on a quarterly basis to review expenses, projections, and to discuss either revenue or expense concerns if there are any. We also receive funding through the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona money that we receive is all federal funding. It's a pass-through. We don't actually receive funding from the state. It's just money that they manage on behalf of FTA. It is all reimbursement basis. We do that monthly and quarterly. And then internally, we have a quarterly review of the status of those projects and those funding sources. Our third major funding source is the Federal Transit Administration. And like the money we receive from ADOT, it is all reimbursement basis. We do monthly drawdowns of that money. And I will point out, we do receive operating assistance from FTA, and it's roughly 25% of our total operating each year. And then the check and balance on that is that we have these quarterly meetings internally, and those quarterly reports go to the Federal Transit Administration. Next slide. Sorry, next slide. All of our financial functions are managed by a financial management policy that was developed in 2009. We updated that policy in 2019. This policy does include our internal controls, so ensuring that we have appropriate checks and balances to manage these things and assure both our board and our partners that we are controlling risk. The financial management plan does include several different functions. I've highlighted a few here. If you're interested in the full policy, we would be happy to share it. A couple of really important ones is that the financial management policy prescribes that we prioritize federal funding for one-time and capital improvements. So as we receive additional funding, we always try and put it towards those one-time and capital improvements. I will just remind that we did say 25% of our operating comes from federal sources, and we're working on a plan to reduce that dependency at this time. We have a reserve requirement, which is 25% of our operating budget. And we all of our decision-making on debt management, accounting processes, and risk management are included, like I said, in that financial management policy, which includes internal controls. Next slide. We want to be transparent with both the public and our board and our partners in all of our financial management practices. And so we have two different ways that we check in with the board and the TAC on an annual basis. One is the budget, and that budget has 3 separate presentations. In April, we set the priorities. In May, we review the detailed budget line by line, including changes and priorities, and then we adopt that budget in June. Just as a reminder, the budget does mean that we submit to NAU, to the City of Flagstaff, to Coconino County, request for funding that those 3 entities also have to adopt in their own budget processes. So we're an expense to each of our partners, and what they pay us is revenue to us. We also have performance reports. So quarterly, we develop a report that shows how we're doing in regards to both financial and system performance. We compare to prior periods, and we compare to peer agencies. We are looking at how to update those measurements and our peers as part of both our strategic investment plan and our 5-year transit plan. Next slide. Long-term sustainability and success of our programs is very dependent upon us regularly and constantly looking at both the transit tax projections and our own financial plan. So twice a year, mid-year, and during the budget, we present those transit tax projections to the board. We do look at a 10-year projection, and the city does the first 5 years generally, and Mountain Line then uses 2% CPI for those years beyond that 5-year to get to that 10-year period. We've been doing that for several years. It's worked well. Under COVID, we've been coming much more often than that, but generally in a typical year, it would be twice annually. And our financial plan is done internally every quarter, where we look at what are our projected expenses, what adjustments do we need to make, and then we update that with those city projections that are available from city staff 2 times per year. And I think, Rhonda, next slide. That's a quick down and dirty of our financial management practices and policies. I know I went fast, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Heather. Questions or comments for Heather? So the only thing I would say in your, I think it was the 3rd slide, you talk about the contributions, basically the cost that you give to the city, NAU, and the county, but it wasn't mentioned in the beginning that those are also funding sources. So just might want to add that in the beginning so that connection is, that was
Thank you.
only, but that, I think that's a really good overview for those that are unfamiliar with your financial process. Any questions or comments?
Just a comment, Madam Chair.
Yeah, absolutely, Shane.
Heather, I have always appreciated your financial background and the manner in which you're moving that program along. I just wanted to express my appreciation for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
All right. As I mentioned, we are moving something from the progress report into our presentation today, and it is the Route 8 extension with Busy.
Actually, I'm going to take it.
Okay, with Kate.
All right. I don't have a presentation today because we did just pull this and just wanted to have a little bit of a conversation with the TAC and then with the board this month about our proposal for the Route 8 extension with Sky Cottages. So Sky Cottages was a zoning map amendment that went to Planning and Zoning and Council this month for a new subdivision out at Woody Mountain Road. And extending Route 8 to Woody Mountain Road has been a goal of Mountain Line, I think since at least 2008, maybe longer. As development continues to occur, we're looking for ways to get private development to buy into that extension because it really is the private development that's occurring that is creating additional need for transit. So we did go to, and let me back up one more point. So historically, the board has asked us to get private development to buy in to transit, much as a utility does, or much as a developer contributes to roadways. And the direction was that this really shouldn't all be on the general taxpayer, that they really should be contributing to transit service. So we went to Planning and Zoning and Council this month based on that direction to ask Sky Cottages to buy into the Route 8 extension. And that was not approved as a part of the development agreement. And I think what I wanted to share is some thoughts and lessons learned on the process. So currently the city's process doesn't have a mechanism for Mountain Line to have a seat at the table early on. So we follow developments as they get submitted to the city, and we're able to submit comments to the planners. We did this, we asked early on that they would consider transit as a part of the development agreement. And the city's response is that since we're not part of the city, that's not part of the process. And ultimately what it forces Mountain Line into is approaching Planning and Zoning and Council at the dais, which is not our preferred alternative. It's very awkward for board members. We're making big asks, and it is hard to negotiate those things on the fly in the middle of a meeting. And it also pits us against the developer, and it pits us against city staff. So it's not a process that we are fans of. I think really what we would like is a seat at the table early on, so that way transit could be considered along with all the other asks of the city. So for example, it was a large ask. It was $250,000 a year for 5 years, which is how much it would cost Mountain Line, what the portion that Mountain Line needs to fund the route. So that's over $1 million is what we were asking. We realize that's a lot, but that much was asked in road improvements and more. That much was asked in sewer and more. And so we're trying to figure out how do we get to be part of the negotiation. So this developer contributed to a future stoplight that might be needed in 2040. This developer widened the roadway to a road configuration that might be needed in 2040. but they didn't have to contribute to transit. And I understand how we become the straw that breaks the camel's back on a development when we have to be the last thing. And so I don't have a lot more than that right now. I don't have a particular solution. It's really just a conversation to say, if it is still the direction of the board to get private development to buy in, this process is not going to favor us in being successful, and that we need a way with the city to be more collaborative and have transit at the table early on. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, very difficult. And you guys have been working on it for years with various developments and even existing to try to connect housing with transit. And honestly, if we want to move forward with our climate goals, that seems like it would be a natural thing. Jillian.
Yes, I would like to, I know exactly what Katie's saying, and I have worked in the same environment. What are some of the conversations you've already had with the city and with the planning board about coming to the table? Have there been past discussions? And I know Shane is listening to this too. What are the true possibilities? What would you want the city to support in some way, either through a voting mechanism or just make it the city council making decisions?
Thank you. I think there are a couple different approaches that we're interested in. And first, I'll say we've talked about different things with city staff and generally get the pushback that they believe that it's not possible because we're not technically an agency of the city or division of the city, and they can't be asking for things that aren't the city's. And so that's typically where we've gotten pushback. We have seen other communities that are able to do this though. And so we think that there are legal mechanisms or avenues to have that seat at the table. I think when things go through a development agreement process, there's a lot of negotiation about what the priority asks of the development are between water and sewer and transportation, and everybody's trying to find that happy balance. And I think if transit could be one of the things on the table in those early discussions, we could start to have conversations that say, do we really want this developer to be investing in widening a road for potential future uses, or do we want them to be putting that money into transit? So I think we need a seat at the negotiating table, or for transit at least have a seat at the negotiating table. I also think that there are structural changes to the traffic impact analysis that could support transit. Right now, it's very car focused. They do a traffic impact analysis and it spits out basically what roadway improvements the city wants. And I think that that process could be modernized to include bike ped transit in a way that it doesn't currently. I think bike ped gets some analysis in there. I think transit's really at the bottom of the list. And so there's really these fundamental structural problems, in my opinion, that are barriers to us being able to advance these conversations.
Thank you, Kate. But
Anything else, Jillian?
I just feel that I can feel incredible frustration at this situation when we talk about climate change and trying to deal with parking issues in the city. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, thanks, Jillian. Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And we've talked about this before, and I think the perspective from the city, the city voters put this into place. To think that this is separate from the city, just doesn't follow logically. Yes, there's an IGA, but the city is basically, contracting through that IGA for services from Mountain Line. And so, I think there just needs to be a kind of a fundamental shift as to, what the city is doing for its constituents per their mandates through those votes. And so it needs to be an attitude that they are delivering transportation services, including transit, and Mountain Line is the provider of those services. As far as the negotiations, it is a little out of coordination with, hey, yeah, as Kate mentioned, they're building sidewalks, they're building roads, and they're building that right out of the gate before, the first house is built. So there's really no demand for those extra facilities, but they're being built and experienced. Transit is going to be very similar. There's not really going to be sufficient demand for transit until several homes are built at least. And so, maybe some of the negotiations are to defer those payments or to put payments in place, that anticipate that structure. But, I think just there needs to be a fundamental kind of policy realization on transit's place at the table and the city's responsibility for delivering transit, whomever's providing it. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Shane, you turned on your camera. Did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I had to sit down for this one. Yeah, Kate, I really appreciate your comments. I appreciate the difficulty expressed in those comments and the frustration. I've been listening with interest and intent. I don't think just you getting to the table, Mountain Line at the table, to be part of the negotiations with the developer is where this starts. I think it starts with an internal discussion between Mountain Line and the city about the role transit needs to play or should play. What is that role, to define it? Make sure that we secure that understanding, and then we get into the room with the developer and begin negotiations. But if we were to just throw Kate at the table and she gets there and waves the transit flag in front of a developer, it's going to be in direct competition with a lot of other stuff. Things that are material to public health. I mean, you got to have capacity in your sewer lines and in your water lines to handle growth going forward. So those demands are going to be on the table. And every developer, along the way, kind of pays into that program. And it's the last developer that usually gets stuck with, making it happen. Then you've got roads. Well, we're widening a road, but buses have to travel on those roads as well, right? And if there's ever going to be a concept realized on 66 for BRT, you've got to have wide enough roads to accommodate something like that. So, I mean, it is all mixed in there. And then to kind of trump it all, and I think this is where the council was feeling Tuesday night, is this whole idea of affordability. And when you've got that ceiling that's there, we all realize that something's going to give. Something is just not going to make it in the mix. And is that water lines? Is that sewer lines? Is that road infrastructure that does support transit, or is it the more formal capital T transit that Kate, you were so wonderfully and very articulately communicating Tuesday night? So I think it really is a competition of values, and I think the conversation doesn't start at the negotiating table with the developer. I think it needs to start before you're in the heat of the moment with a developer at a negotiating table, and we are all of one accord in where transit fits in those negotiations. Once we figure that out, then having you at the table means that we're all kind of moving in the same direction. We understand where transit's at. We understand where water and sewer's at. We understand where road infrastructure and frontage improvements, sidewalks and foot trails and all that kind of stuff plays into this. All of it at the end of the day has a bottom line to it that means an increase in the cost of living to the, to the residents that currently call Flagstaff home and are looking to call Flagstaff home. So anyway, I guess I'll end my comments there, but I certainly appreciate, Kate, the passion and the delivery of the message. Very difficult, but thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Any other comments or questions for Kate? Okay, seeing none. Oh, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I don't suppose my comments left Kate feeling any better about the situation. But if nothing else, Kate, I want you to know that I'm hearing you, and we can, and I'm committed to keep working with you on that. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Honestly, I thought the last point about the conversation shouldn't start at the negotiation table. We've got to do something before that. So, who's in charge of the TIA process? Does each city create their own? Is it a statewide? Okay. Cities create their own.
Yeah, cities create their own, and maybe actually I'll let Dave speak more. He probably has more experience about what the city's done in the past and how that process is.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, each city does create its own. I worked with city staff. It's probably been several years ago now. We reviewed several processes from around the Southwest and incorporated many thoughts. We used the the regional transportation model to start getting into some of the transit, pedestrian, and bicycle aspects, and try to work those into the process. I think Kate's right, is they're not as quantitative yet as roads are, and I don't want to get into too many of the engineering versus planning tropes, but engineers like numbers, and if they can, and there's 100 years of number crunching behind roadways, and so that is something that I think they tend to be comfortable with. There's a long-standing practice for it, and that gets the attention. Getting the numbers behind transit, pedestrian, and bicycle components is a little more difficult. We're getting there. I think we're going to be there later this year. But I think the bigger question, and I think Shane spoke to it, is really what's the policy position first, and then let's get into the negotiations later, and then we can inform those negotiations, I think, better than we had in the past.
Thanks, Dave. Jillian, did you want to chime in?
Yes, I'd just like to make one comment. To me, affordable housing needs to be brought together with transit. Affordable housing means one car per family, probably. So transit is more necessary. Just as many low-income workers are using bicycles. The two go together, and it's like senior housing needs to be closer into town, and many places just put it outside, cheaper land. Those people need to be in town. We need to look at the housing needs in terms of transit as well. Not just transit needs to serve them, but they need to be served. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. Any other comments or questions for Kate?
I have a question. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the raise hand today.
Hi, Gail.
Hi. So I agree with what you're saying, Kate, but I feel like there's opportunity to work with the city on what does that look like, because it's confusing. It's confusing to the developer. It's confusing because at the end of the day, NAPTA is a service provider, right? We know that transit is incredibly important to the region, but as Shane mentioned, is it as important as water and sewer and some of the public health needs? I agree. I'm not sure that a seat at the table is the right way to do it. And I think if you have examples of how other cities have partnered and made that happen, I think that would be a good step forward, because transit is important, but we have a lot of important, right? There's so many important things that are happening right now. And I just wanted to publicly say that your speech on Tuesday night and how you handled the developer at the dais was remarkable. And your passion was coming through and you handled it very professionally. So thanks for what you do.
I appreciate that, Gail, and I definitely hear, I recognize that full challenge of there are many needs when a development comes in. And yes, sewer and water, it's hard to argue with either of those. I think more where I come from is there more conversation to be had in terms of policy is related to some of the road improvements. So, you know, is it really the priority to be putting towards a pot of money for a future potential signal that might be needed? Is it really more important to be widening a road because maybe in the future that capacity might be needed? A road in general is needed, but doesn't have to be wider. You know, that developer, for example, was asked to put in a left-hand turn for people coming from Woody Mountain Road into the development. That's not a very common movement. There aren't that many houses out on Woody Mountain Road. Could some of those things instead have been, you know, we can live without some of these in order to advance transit? And it is very much a policy discussion. I think, you know, Shane and Gail, you're both right. We don't want to be duking it out in front of the developer. We need to have the discussions with the city behind the scenes and all walk in so that the developer is very clear. And I totally agree. The process right now is not fair to a developer and not transparent and not easy for them to navigate.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Kate. And you know, I will just add, you know, again, Flagstaff, we talk about our commitment to climate, and it just seems to make sense that we would want to create a town where a car is not necessary, or at least doesn't have to be used every day, because housing is connected to transit and it's easy. So interesting. Good luck, Kate. Thank you. Thanks everybody for your comments. I appreciate it. I know it can be a really sensitive topic, but one we need to keep on having and keep moving forward. So thank you, Kate, for doing that. Okay, the last item on the agenda, update on current events. Heather.
So I have some news to share, and I'm sorry we didn't get this out in writing to you prior to the meeting, but I will have Rhonda send it out afterwards so that you can also review it at your leisure and let me know if you have questions. We continue to pursue vaccines. Most of our staff are pursuing those vaccines based on whether they fit in any of the priority groups, like are they age 75 and older, are they age 65 and older. Transit workers are still not prioritized for the vaccine at this time. We are in the group of other essential workers, so we expect to be prioritized in the next wave, but currently we can't get our staff vaccinated as a priority under the transit worker title. We continue to be challenged with staffing shortages. Currently, we have 7 staff members out, either ill with COVID or exposed to COVID. I will say that recently we had a 20% shortage in our operations team alone due to exposure and illness. So we are closely monitoring our staffing and may face the need to reduce frequency on one or more routes because of these shortages. We are shifting people around, but we, like, for example, had one staff member yesterday who reported that he has not had a day off in 21 days. And so we're starting to see burnout and wear down on our staff as well. So just want to provide that update. I did send out a press release yesterday. Hopefully all of you did see it. President Biden signed an executive order requiring masks on public transit. That order was then reiterated in a security directive from the Transportation Security Administration and an order from the CDC, basically making mask wearing on public transportation a federal law. So we've been working very hard on getting our drivers up to speed, our passengers up to speed on what those requirements are. I will say it's gone very smoothly. We got signs out Tuesday morning. Our drivers had one-on-one with our operations director that morning to talk about concerns and what does it mean. We have not experienced any incidents with a passenger refusing to comply. So we're very happy to report that. Our biggest concerns are the change from the city proclamation. So most people in our community are now used to the proclamation of the mayor from last June. This federal law deviates from that. And so it's just getting people used to those changes, but it's all gone very smoothly. I'll pause real quick. I saw Shane turned on his camera and make sure if he had a question.
Just quickly, Heather, is there, Madam Chair, thank you. Is there a path forward for considering an advancement of vaccines for your operators due to the fact that they are in such close proximity in serving the public? I mean, I know that we probably couldn't justify them being categorized as emergency service but maybe essential service or something along those lines. I'm sure you've thought it through. I just thought that I would ask just to make sure that there isn't a stone that hasn't been unturned. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate that. So early on in December, transit workers were included in the priority phase of 1B. Late in December, CDC changed their recommendations. The state and the county both have picked up that recommendation to put transit workers under other essential workers, which is really the fourth section under 1B, which is currently just not prioritized for the vaccine. So we keep encouraging staff to try every avenue that they can. We know there's waiting list in town that people can make use of, and we've been encouraging that. We've been sending all of the information that we can, but I appreciate the comment, Shane. We've worked very closely with Coconino County on how we can structure it differently and just haven't found a way in. And again, we know a lot of that is because CDC put transit in the other essential category. So moving on.
But it is, I'm sorry, but Heather, it is categorized as an essential service, right?
Correct. We just aren't prioritized at this time.
Okay, but you are above in terms of priority than the general public, in other words.
We are still above the general public. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yep. Wanted to share gratitude for our operations team and our fleet and facilities teams. We were able to open all routes on time and keep services running throughout the snowstorms in late January. And that was not a small feat. I think the snow fell as quickly as we shoveled it. So we did, as a leadership team, work very hard to recognize those staff members with handwritten notes and small gift cards. And I will have more information on exactly what kind of hours and time that cost us as an agency, but we had some staff that worked straight through with no breaks.
Heather, I don't know if you saw this or not, but I found a cool reaction emoji of clapping hands in celebrating your fabulous operating team.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I didn't see it, so thank you for drawing my attention.
Oh, I'm going to do it again for you then. Hold on.
Okay. Oh, I see it. I see it on Aaron. I think it's because I don't see people who don't have their video turned on. But thank you. That's awesome. We learned earlier this week, Kate shared with me that the city of Flagstaff has notified us that they are recipient of a grant from NACOG for the phase 1 environmental on all 3 of the potential DCC properties on Phoenix Avenue and phase 2 on 2 of the 3 parcels. So that value could be as much as about $40,000 for those environmental studies. And we're very excited to partner with the city and reduce both of our costs on that project. CTAA has submitted a letter to Congress and to the Senate on behalf of small urban and rural transit providers requesting that any future COVID-related relief uses the standard formula funds. So if you will recall, there was the first round in which we received $7.2 million, and the second round we received nothing, as did most transit providers in Arizona. And that's because they deviated from the standard formula in making those awards. So we didn't receive any funding. We're seeing a lot of support for asking those that make those decisions to return to that standard formula. So we're hopeful that if there's future funding, that they'll use the standard formula and we'll get additional funding. We, separate from CTAA, also sent letters asking all of our elected officials to consider that in decision making in the future. And lastly, I just want to share some recognition of staff. We have several staff over the last 3 months and in the coming 3 months that have significant service awards. Jeremiah Sheward is an operator and he reached 1 year of service. Arlinda Yazzie, who is also an operator, 1 year of service. Curtis Coleman is an operator with 5 years of service. Geraldine Lewis, operator with 5 years of service. Tim Brennan is our facilities technician. He has 5 years of service. Kate Morley, our deputy general manager, has reached her 5 years of service. Dave Schweiger, an operator with 10 years of service. Heath Bohr, an operator with 15 years of service. And Jim Wagner, our operations director with 15 years of service. So we do recognize these on a quarterly basis and we offer them a gift to recognize those years of service. So I just wanted to take a moment and celebrate those staff as well. And with that, my current events are concluded, but I'd be happy to go back and address any questions.
Thanks, Heather, and congratulations, Kate. And I don't know if Jim is on here for the years of service. That's awesome. And by the way, my emoji was actually like confetti coming out of a, I don't know, it looks like an upside down hat. So good celebration emojis. Questions, comments for Heather? Oh, you got a heart. Oh, Heather put the heart. That's sweet. All right. Hearing none. Next meeting is, oh, March 4th. That's my birthday. It's my last year in my 40s. See if I.
Hey, she said it. I think that means that we can do something for her.
I think I'll be off that day, and Shane will take care of the meeting, right?
I don't think. Well, you can't deprive us of you know, whipping out the vocal cords and singing the happy birthday to you.
There you go. I am taking off the next day. My husband's like, "Why are you taking off? That's not your birthday." Anyway, March 4th is the next
because
meeting.
of your dedication. It's your dedication.
It is.
Dedication. Thank you, Erin.
Next meeting is March 4th. If there are no other comments, questions, or concerns, meeting adjourned. Have a good weekend. No snow this weekend. Yay. Enjoy the sun.
Everyone.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erin.
Bye-bye.
Bye.